You're listening to the Fresh Hell podcast. Fresh Hell contains stories of a disturbing and often graphic nature and is intended for a mature audience. Please don't let your kids listen to this, or they might turn out like us.
I'm Bonnie Lee, the host of Writing About Crime, a Canadian true crime podcast that looks for the story behind criminal cases. The people, the places, and the events that join together to create a narrative, not a scoop. I am not reading you the news. I am writing about crime. I hope you'll join me on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Hi, and welcome to Fresh Hell. I'm Annie.
And I'm Johanna, and you just heard Bonnie Lee, the host of Writing About Crime. She covers Canadian true crime and really puts a lot of research into her episodes. I'm sure you will find cases that you've never heard before, and she also has the most amazing co-worker who helps her with the podcast, and her name is Astrid, her beautiful cat. A ginger cat.
They're the best.
Go and check out Writing About Crime. You're gonna love it.
Please do. And Bonnie Lee, please tell Astrid we said hi. I want to tell you, Johanna, I'm sorry today if there's a little bit of extra background noise today. It's pouring rain outside, and there's a massive construction project on my street, and we're on the flight path to Logan, especially today, it seems.
So today's the perfect day for recording.
It's the perfect day to record. Yep. Hopefully you won't hear anything, but if you do, apologies. More importantly, though, enough of that. How was your trip to Sarajevo?
It was lovely. I've been several times, so we didn't do any sightseeing. We had amazing food. I think I gained like 576 kilos. At least I feel like it.
Great.
We relaxed a lot. I did manage to take a few photos of the Latin Bridge and the spot where Archduke Franz Ferdinand and the Duchess Sophie were shot. You will find them in our closed Facebook group.
Yeah, I saw those. That little tea shop looked amazing. I would like to visit someday.
It was so cute. I enjoyed the trip very much.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it looked really, really good. I really would like to visit there. That reminds me, actually. So, friends, one thing that we keep seeing in both positive and negative reviews, it seems like some of you think that we hate the state of Alabama. And friends, we do not hate the state of Alabama. I think Johanna had like one just funny, weird, super xenophobic experience there, but she nor I, we don't hate the state. We don't think everyone in Alabama is xenophobic. I've only driven through Alabama on my way to New Orleans, but there were very helpful gas station attendants there when I stopped. Oh God, that was before. Do you remember when we were going somewhere and all you had were maps? So you'd pull off the highway to get gas and be like, I'm still headed toward New Orleans, right? They were very nice. So please don't think that we hate Alabama. Some of my favorite people in the world are from Alabama.
Nope, I definitely don't hate Alabama. Please don't take it too hard. I think I mentioned several times that I really do love the South. I really do. Also, we cover crimes from countries all over the world, but we don't think these places are all dangerous either. And I always mention to Annie how rude our waiters here are. And I live in the third rudest city in the world. So please. We don't hate Alabama, we don't hate Vienna, and we don't hate Boston.
No, exactly right. That's exactly right. Yeah, people are rude to me all the time, and I still say, come visit. All right, what else do we need to let our listeners know about?
We have a poll on our Facebook group page where you can vote on what you want us to cover for our 52nd episode, because it's coming up. We're there. 1 year, Fresh Hell. Yeah, we did it.
I can't believe this. I really am kind of shocked, actually. So yeah, for our 1 year anniversary episode, your options are you ready? It's exciting. Jack the Ripper, the Enfield Poltergeist, or the Mothman.
I think Jack the Ripper is in the lead.
It's like neck and neck, isn't it?
Yeah, I think with the Enfield Poltergeist.
Yeah.
I know you all might be thinking, ugh, Jack the Ripper. I can't stand to hear one more word about Jack the Ripper. Hey, it's the Victorian crime, so yeah, you all knew it was coming at one point.
I mean, there's no way where we're never going to cover it. But yeah, it's a little scary because there are actually people out there called Ripperologists who are just complete experts and know everything there is to know on the case. And I think the last time I looked into it was when I read Patricia Cornwell's book on it.
Oh, I'm in one ripperologist group, by the way, on Facebook for years now.
Good. See? Great. I'm just afraid they were going to come after us if we did the Ripper murders and be like, actually, and then roll out a very long list of all the things I got wrong. I'm already afraid of people coming after us for Villisca. Oh, anxiety, thou art a false friend. All right, should we get to today's murdery bits?
So today's episode started with us planning to cover the Villisca X murders, but then we remembered that maybe Villisca was part of a series. Do you pronounce that right?
No, it's Villisca.
Villisca?
Hard V, yeah.
Villisca?
Yep.
Villisca.
Villisca. Yeah, you're good. It's fine.
People, you know I have an accent. You
Yeah.
might have recognized it by now.
I love it. I think it's the cutest thing in the world when you say the V's like a W. It's really, I find it charming. Yeah, so it does seem like there's enough information out there to think that it's definitely possible that there was an unidentified serial killer basically riding trains from the Rocky Mountains to the Midwest. Yeah, so our one episode on the Villisca Axe murders has now turned into a 2-part series on the murders before, ending with Villisca. So we're going to start chronologically. Today we're going to cover the murders that happened before Villisca, the ones that people feel are most likely to be connected. There are others, but the ones we're going to cover today are probably the most likely in terms of the serial killer theory.
Yeah, there certainly are similarities to today's crimes and the Villisca murders. And then next week we'll cover Villisca and the various suspects, and you can tell us if you think they are connected or not connected, maybe. Who knows? We'll see.
I know. I'm still going back and forth, so yeah. Today's warnings, it's a lot of talk about families being murdered, including children. There's also there's like maybe an element of sexual assault, but it's more hinted at and vague than any kind of graphic. I don't think it'll be particularly triggering, but just in case, you know. The murders are pretty graphic though, so listen, it's what you're here for. One of the best sources for part 1 for today's episode is a blog we found called Getting the Axe. And I honestly can't believe I only just found this blog. These cases are hard because you'll pull something like a census record, marriage licenses, this kind of stuff. So you're looking at official documents, and then you'll go into the old newspaper records and you'll be reading all these old newspapers, and the newspaper reports will have information completely wrong. And you know it's wrong because you're looking at census records and birth certificates and things. And so the newspaper's reporting it, but they've got the age wrong by 20 years or the wrong names or the wrong relationship. It's just incredibly frustrating because you don't, and very time consuming because you don't know who you can trust. You know, the birth and death records aren't going to tell me what actually happened. I need the newspapers for that, but it's kind of it's tricky. But then we found this Getting the Axe blog, and the author, who goes by Inspector Winship, I believe, clearly had similar issues and spent even more time, I think, than I did summarizing the information that they, and I agree, suspect is the most valid, it was just a huge help. I just wish I'd found this source earlier in my research. So it's a great one.
Yeah, another great source is a 2012 Smithsonian article by Mike Dash. But there are, as usual, a lot of sources for this episode, and all of our sources can be found listed in the Facebook group. And I'm working on it, people, putting them on our website too, www.freshhellpodcast.com. Yeah.
We need an intern.
One day.
One day. All right. So, yeah, let's get into the murders. Okay. The first one is the Wayne Burnham double murder. This happened on September 17th, 1911 in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Henry Francis Wayne, who seems to have gone by the name Frank, he had lived in Indiana with his wife Blanche and their 1-year-old daughter Lula. Based on records, he either worked as a laborer or a photographer. I love records. Frank was suffering from what they called consumption, which today we call tuberculosis. And so because of this, as with so many others, it was recommended by his doctors that he relocate to Colorado to get some fresh air. It's mentioned in the papers that he was a member of the Modern Woodsmen. And so at first I thought this meant that he was a woodsman. Like in fairy tales, I thought he chops down trees.
Yeah, that's usually what I would think a woodsman was, yeah.
Right. Well, the modern woodsman, this is different. Turns out this was a fraternal organization that also provided life insurance. And when tuberculosis was sweeping the country and killing at a rate that earned it the nickname the White Plague, the Modern Woodsman organization built a sanitarium in Colorado Springs. And basically they would pay for their members to go there and get treated because it was cheaper than actually paying out a death benefit. And so it's fascinating. They actually had these huts that were based on the design of Native American teepees, and they were laid out outside on the lawn because they really did feel that the key to getting well was to have fresh air. We'll post a photo. It's really pretty fascinating. And if you're in that area, if you live near Colorado Springs or are visiting, there's an article in our sources about these huts and where you can find preserved or restored ones. It's just really interesting. Many historians will tell you that tuberculosis is what helped to really put the state of Colorado on the map, and sanatoriums and luxury hotels like the Stanley, that's the hotel The Shining was based on. They were all built as a haven for those suffering from tuberculosis. Some estimate that in 1900, 1 in 3 people in Colorado had tuberculosis, and that Colorado Springs itself was a town basically built for TB patients. So, the very handsome Henry Francis Wayne marries the very beautiful Blanche Vera McGinnis. They get married in 1908. Their daughter Lula May is born on St. Patrick's Day in 1909. But Frank isn't doing very well. His tuberculosis is bad, and so he leaves Pulaski, Indiana for Colorado Springs and the Woodsman Sanitarium located there. And it seems he does so much better in Colorado that he writes to his young wife and tells her to come west. So, young Blanche sells all of their furniture, and with $55 in her purse, she and her baby girl get on a train headed west to meet her husband for a new life in Colorado. I think at the time she was 20 and he was 22, so they've got their whole future ahead of them.
So while at the sanatorium, Frank met Arthur John Burnham, who was also a member of the Colorado Springs camp of the Modern Woodmen of America. And Arthur was apparently the one who told Frank about a house available to rent very near his own, and that's how the Wayne family found their little cottage and how the two families became neighbors. Unlike the Wayne family, who had only been in Colorado for like a month or so, Arthur Burnham had been in Colorado Springs for about 16 years. Arthur had come from Michigan to treat his tuberculosis, and it was in Colorado that he met and married the local woman May Alice Hill in 1904. He was 14 years her senior. They had 2 kids, Nellie Emma, born in 1904, and John, born in 1909. And by 1911, his tuberculosis had worsened, and he was living and working at the sanatorium, which was built in 1909. But he would come home like twice a month to visit his family.
That must have been hard.
Yeah. Well,
like just only see your family twice a month.
Well, I think twice a month is plenty.
But your husband and kids? Or your wife and kids, though?
I don't know. I see my husband like once every 2 or 3 months.
Fair enough.
On that Sunday morning, September 17th, 1911, May Burnham took the 2 children, Nellie, who was at the time about 6 or 7, and John, who was around 2, to church. They were seen running errands around town. May's younger sister, Nettie, she didn't live far and was a regular visitor at the home. The sisters were very close. She had been there that Sunday night and left after dinner around 9:15. She had plans to return that coming Wednesday, which was September 20th, so that the sisters could work on some sewing jobs, something like that. The afternoon of the 20th arrives and Nettie arrives as planned and is knocking at her sister's door and getting no answer. She finds both the front and back doors locked, so she went over to a nearby house where one of May's friends, a woman named Anna Merritt, lived, thinking maybe her sister was over there. She was not at Anna's house, and Anna, who hadn't seen the family since after church on Sunday, had actually thought they were at Nettie's. So now both women are extremely worried. They take a key from Anna's house and they go back to May's house and spend some time getting the back door to open with the key they have. I don't think we know the exact reason why they had trouble getting in, but we just know it took them a little while to get the door to open. So the door finally opens and they are hit with a terrible smell. As they enter into the back room, Nettie notices that everything is just as she left it on Sunday night. In that back room, it seemed to be a combination kitchen and dining room, but also had a bed in it.
Yeah, so apparently they would sometimes, she would take in lodgers to help pay expenses. I think with Arthur living at the sanitarium, money was tight. So I think that May did sewing, and then she took in lodgers when her friend Anna's house was full. They lived near the train tracks, so traveling salesmen, that kind of thing would have been super common. And she had actually lived with Anna before when they first moved there when Arthur was very ill. And this is the same Anna who was about to discover the crime scene along with her sister, Nettie. Please continue to the really bad stuff.
Okay, so that first back room was fine. Bed wasn't slept in, so that means, or it looks like there was no lodger there before. Then they went on and they peeked into the front bedroom, and it's there that they encounter the worst nightmare. So mostly they see blood. It's blood on the bed, blood splashed on the walls, blood splashed on the ceiling, and the two women run screaming from the home, and two men who were passing by rush over to help them. Inside they see the body of May and her son side by side in the bed, and her daughter was positioned somewhat across the legs of the mother, which has led to some speculating that she was the only one who may have woken before being killed with the axe. Because that's what the murder weapon was.
Mm-hmm.
The men go inside their house and immediately come back out and they run for the police. The commotion is drawing a crowd of neighbors. This is a tight little neighborhood, like everybody knows everybody. The police arrive and they find it suspicious that the husband Arthur isn't there. So, of course, he's once the prime suspect and the police head out to the sanitarium to arrest him. And he'd actually already been making his way back home from the sanitarium, which was about 12 miles away from the house, and he thought there might have been a railway accident.
Yeah, when they told him, can you imagine, like, hearing that you would never think murder, right?
So in the meantime, back at the scene of the Burnham murders, it was about the same time as the coroner arrived that neighbors began to remark that the young Wayne family home had been very quiet. And isn't it odd that their shades are drawn and that nobody has come outside to see what all the commotion was about? So a few officers head over to the Wayne house just next door and they bang on the front door and get no answer. So they head around to the back door where they find an axe, absolutely covered in blood. And the axe belonged to another neighbor, but it had been borrowed by Frank to chop some wood. They forced their way inside and found Frank, Blanche, and their 2-year-old daughter Lula all in bed together, all bludgeoned to death with an axe while sleeping.
It's just so bad. The one thing about this killer I keep thinking is he must have been really fast with the axe, right? I know all of these people lived right near a train station. They live right near train tracks. And so a lot of people say, because they live next to the train tracks, that would have made them very heavy sleepers who had gotten used to the sound of the train. But I think there are just different kinds of noise. You know what I mean? Like our bedroom windows face the backyard and the back deck is off our on the other side of the windows. And so if someone is on the deck, if I hear the creak of a board on the deck outside our house, I wake up immediately, even though I might have completely slept through the much louder sounds of like the dog waking up, leaving the room, and my husband letting him out.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there are noises that you're used to and there are strange noises. I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, so really fast with an axe, which is, I don't know, I think that's creepy. All right, let's talk about the crime scenes and what kind of clues. And, I have to tell you, so almost all the newspapers from like 1911 and 1912, friends, Johanna already knows this, but I just wanted to tell our listeners, they spell clue C-L-E-W, and I don't like it. It's, it looks to me like somebody misspelt clause. And I think a clue is like a part of a sail. It's like a sailing term. So every time I see it, it's like, what? C-L-E? It just looks weird. Clues. Not a fan. All right.
So at both homes, with the exception of little Nellie Burnham, all the victims were killed in bed, either while sleeping or before they had the chance to move. Neither home had a dog. Henry had been seen arguing with a man about a week before, but no identification of the man or what the argument was about was ever discovered. Besides this, no one could think of anyone who would want to hurt either family. Robbery was not a motive in either attacks, as there were small valuables that could have easily been stolen and pawned in another town down the railroad tracks. Blanche Wayne was wearing gold bracelets and there was a gold watch on the dresser at the Burnhams. The doors of both homes were locked with keys. They believed the killer got in through a window at the Burnhams, and at the Waynes he had opened the screen door by cutting a hole in the screen and using a piece of wire or similar to lift the hook off the latch, and then use the same wire as a skeleton key to pick the lock.
Yeah, those old locks, do you think they must have just been easier to pick?
So I know a tiny bit about lock picking.
Oh.
Yeah, my husband was interested. There's like lock-picking competitions, like championships and stuff like that. It's a crazy scene, but it's there. You can find it on YouTube, yeah.
It sounds fun.
And he let me try with a lock-picking set how to do it. It's super, super hard with modern locks. But as far as I know, some of these old locks, you could fool around with them pretty easily. I think depending on the lock, like a bent nail would do the trick as a skeleton key already.
Oh, right. So like all those scenes in movies where somebody just pulls a single bobby pin out and 5 seconds later they're in the room. That's not super off.
Depending on the lock, no, it can work.
That's cool. I mean, also awful.
If the person is really good in doing that, yeah. And if the lock is like you have different pins or things like that. It's a whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have thought they'd be that easy, but people are picking locks and getting to houses all over the place in today's episode, so that makes perfect sense.
I don't think it's that hard, or it was not that hard to get into a house back then. At the Burnham house, the killer had entered through a window, knocking over an ink pot that was sitting on the windowsill when he did. And in the kitchen, they found evidence of the ink spill, hastily cleaned up, as well as a bowl with fingerprints on it in ink. And the bowl was full of bloody water, where the killer had spent some time there cleaning up. We love it when they linger. At least he didn't make some food. They also found a handprint in ink on the eggs. Fingerprinting was still in its infancy and it just wasn't done, although the state did hire Pinkerton detectives and they did take Bertillon measurements.
So Bertillon measuring was a system of measurements of like the size of the hand or the length of the finger that they'd use to help to identify a suspect, but the system was eventually replaced by fingerprinting, it's so, when I was first reading this and I was like, oh, you're kidding me that the killer literally left fingerprints in ink.
Yeah. That's every police officer's dream nowadays,
a dream,
right?
Yes, yeah. But they didn't do fingerprints yet. So eventually fingerprinting completely replaced the Bertillon system. So there was some question as to whether May Burnham might have been sexually assaulted. There's a bit of a hint here in one source, but there's nothing really concrete. I don't think she was actually assaulted. I don't think she was maybe not even touched at all. I get the impression that the killer liked to look at the women after he murdered them. Yeah. It also seems, sadly, that may have been expecting again. I think one of the reports I read said that she was in a delicate condition, so I would think that would mean pregnancy, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. But this could also be a rumor. Honest, it's so hard to understand, like, what to believe in these papers because so much of it is sensationalized and so much of it is just made up. It does appear in both cases that covers were pulled up over the heads of the victims. There was some confusion over whether the killer might have started a fire at the Burnham home or tried to. There was a burned curtain, but we believe that this was later attributed to a flashbulb going off too close to the curtain. This is also frustrating because it's actually really difficult to find any actual crime scene photographs for these cases. Mostly we have a lot of photos of enormous crowds of neighbors outside the scene of the crime. I think there's only like one photograph that we have that shows one of the rooms after the bodies were removed. I wish we had more crime scene photos so that we could compare these different scenes, and I'm sure I'm not the only one wishing that. They are fairly sure, that both murders happened late Sunday night or very early Monday morning, and they have no suspects. Neither family can think of anyone who would want to hurt either family.
And of course, the only survivor, Arthur, is immediately taken into custody. He insists he's innocent, the staff at the sanatorium vouch for his whereabouts, and his mother-in-law and the rest of the family vouched for his character, and they remained close to him, swearing he loved his family, he took care of them, and he died, unfortunately, of a combination of tuberculosis and Bright's disease on February 5th, 1912, so that's less than 6 months after his family was murdered, and was laid to rest beside his family. People didn't like the fact that he didn't show an excess of emotion, but he was quoted in local paper as saying, quote, "That isn't my little child, my girl's got lighter hair than that," end quote. The paper goes on to say that he did then recognize his family.
I think that they were so badly beaten by the face that they were unrecognizable, like you couldn't identify them by their faces. Blood will just change the color of light-colored hair so much.
That was also in the Hinterkaifeck.
Yeah, exactly.
You remember?
I do. Yep. And so just that quote and the fact that, none of them were recognizable, it's just, I'm not surprised he died soon after his family did. And the thing that just really upsets me, you all know this is one of my pet peeves, but I hate it. I hate it when people who are grieving seem suspicious to other people just because they're not acting the way you think a grieving person should act. Usually it's somebody who has no idea what traumatic loss feels like or looks like. They compare it to like losing a 90-year-old relative. And while that's certainly very sad, it's really not comparable to a traumatic loss.
Yeah, but people are like that not only with people who are grieving, but also with victims. Like a victim that doesn't behave like a victim is immediately suspicious to most people, which I hate. I mentioned it before, Natascha Kampusch, how she was treated in Austria by Austrian people after the 10 years or 8 years that she was held by this horrible person.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's disgusting.
Yeah. Yeah. So an important note, this is from the Getting the Axe blog, which we said has been amazing, but both homes were torn down in 1912. So please, please don't go bothering the people who are at those addresses now. It's not the same house, even though it's the same address.
Yeah, please don't harass people in murder houses. This obviously goes for all our past and future cases.
Yeah, listen, they're already battling a haunting. Just let them be. Seriously though, don't be a knob. Like, it's just a shitty move. Don't bother people in murder houses. Okay, the next murder that might be part of this spree happened 2 weeks later in October 1911 in Monmouth, Illinois. Now, I looked up Monmouth on Wikipedia. I'm using Wikipedia now, everyone. It's great. I know there's a Monmouth, New Jersey, so that's why I was like, what? Monmouth, Illinois? I'm not familiar with the one in Illinois. And so here's what Wikipedia had to say. Quote, the town, established in 1831, was originally going to be called, all right, Kosciusko. So, Kosciusko?
Kosciuszko.
Nope. So anyway, that name was drawn out of a hat. They put a bunch of names in a hat and pulled them in.
Are you sure they didn't just put a bunch of letters in a hat?
It really... That's what it sounds like.
Kosciuszko.
Yep. Yeah, listen. Once they pulled Kosciuszko out, the founders of the town were like, ooh, you know what? That looks like it might be a little bit hard to spell and pronounce, you think? So some guy that was just in the audience watching all this, I guess, was like, how about Monmouth? I used to live in Monmouth, New Jersey. And they were like, great. And there you go. That's how we got Monmouth, Illinois. I think there is still a Kosciuszko County, though. Someone from, I'm sure that we must have some listeners in Illinois. Please let us know how you pronounce that, because at this point, I think we really have to know, huh?
Yeah, no shit, that would have been hard to pronounce. Huge thank you to the founders for not putting us through this now.
Well, they kind of did. We brought it on ourselves, though. That's all right.
That was us.
Where someone's going to leave a review about it and how we hate Illinois. So... We do not hate Illinois. I have been once, briefly. All right, anyway, I'm sure someone will leave us a review or tell us how to pronounce it. So the population in Monmouth at this time was around 9,000, and this case was the hardest to find reliable information on. This is the Dawson family murders. So William Dawson and Charity Hollingsworth were from Indiana, and they got married on June 6, 1875. In 1911, when these events take place, William and Charity had been married for about 36 years, and over the years they had 11 or 12 children. I think it was all daughters, and it also seems that only, I think, 7 survived to adulthood. So in 1911, it looks like from census records and other sources that they lived with their youngest 3. The youngest of their children was 12, almost 13-year-old Georgia, who they called Georgie, and also their 2 older daughters. And they had moved to the area of Monmouth about 8 years earlier after William had spent some time in prison for stealing a horse. He had a steady job as the janitor in the local church, and they lived in the poorer part of town in a small 5-room cottage. On Sunday, October 1st, William would normally be up and at work early, making sure the church was all ready for the day's services. So listen, we don't know if he found Jesus in prison or if they were always religious, but also stole horses. And we also don't have any details on the horse stealing, so we're not judging. But it seems like he was trusted, well-liked, honest, reliable member of the neighborhood and the church community. So when the Reverend C.J. Green arrived that Sunday morning, he was surprised and concerned to find that the church was still locked up.
By the time the 11 a.m. service was about to begin and having phoned, which seems posh for the time, especially for me as an Austrian, because I think 1911 almost nobody here had a phone.
Yeah, you know what? I thought that too, but time and again in these cases, it's these homes where there's no indoor plumbing in some of them. There's just an outhouse, or we know they don't have electricity because we talk about, their little lanterns. So there's, homes with no electricity or indoor plumbing, but they have a phone. I meant to look into it more, but I didn't have time and then I forgot. I bet Leon or somebody in the Facebook group will have more information on why phones were around before, electricity and plumbing.
Okay, so however, the church calls the Dawson home and they get no reply, and the Reverend was now really worried. So 2 members of the church headed to the Dawson residence. Papers say to either yell at William for not showing to work or out of concern.
I mean, maybe a little bit of both.
Probably.
Yeah?
Yeah, possible.
Because they don't know then. They just think he hasn't shown up.
They knocked on the front door, but there was no response. They went around the back trying to see into windows, but having no luck because all the curtains were drawn. They knocked on the back door, and again, no reply. But they decided to try the knob, and the back door opened. The inside of the house was dark because all the curtains are closed. The men made their way through the undisturbed kitchen into the front bedroom, where they found the bloody body of young Georgia and immediately notified the police. William and Charity were found in their bed. It seems that thankfully the other 2 older Dawson girls were staying over at a relative's house, and Georgie had wanted to go too, but he told her no, she was too young. So yeah, that's devastating.
Yeah, it's just so sad.
So at first everyone thought they had been attacked with an axe. A lot of people were upset, and because the Dawsons lived on the edge of what was considered a black neighborhood, some of the police were worried about riots.
Yeah, I could see that you'd certainly be worried about that.
Yeah, the remaining family members of the Dawson family were not only grief-stricken, but terrified that the person who killed her parents would come back to finish the job.
Yeah, I can only imagine that level of fear and grief, because if you thought somebody was targeting your family... Yeah. Oh, so I've got 2 newspaper articles to read to you here. So the first is from the Galesburg Evening Mail, October 4th, 1911. Who committed the triple murders? Monmouth, Illinois, October 4th. Special to the Mail. Quote, there have been no developments here in the Dawson triple murder mystery, and while several different rumors have gone out that an arrest has been made, there is no truth in them. The funeral was held yesterday, and the inquest, which was continued until after the funeral, will be taken up again tomorrow. So far, the weapon with which the crime was committed has not been found. Several more theories have been advanced regarding the cause of the crime. One theory advanced is that the triple murder may have been committed by the same person who committed a sextuple murder in Colorado Springs recently, in which the identity of the murderer still remains a mystery. The theory is advanced that probably both crimes were committed by a madman who has a mania to commit murder, and that he is traveling about the country carrying out his fiendish desires. In both instances, the murders occurred in rather poorer districts of the cities and under much the same circumstances. As was anticipated, a crowd that could not be accommodated gathered at the Christian church Tuesday afternoon to attend the funeral services of the late Mr. and Mrs. William E. Dawson and daughter Georgia. The tragic circumstances of their death and mystery surrounding the whole affair served to make the services an occasion of intense interest such as Monmouth has never before witnessed. When the Reverend D.M. Hughes commenced the services at 2 o'clock, there was a tension in the atmosphere that could be distinctly felt, and everyone present involuntarily paid tribute to the solemnity of the occasion. The 3 caskets stood before the altar literally covered with floral offerings which expressed in but a feeble way the interest and sympathy felt by friends and the entire community. Seldom has any city been so stirred as our own during the past 4 days, and the services have given the only opportunity for any tangible expression of the deep feeling engendered by the tragedy of Saturday night. The services were in charge of the Reverend D.E. Hughes, assisted by the Reverend C.J. Green, pastor in charge of the First Presbyterian Church, where Mr. Dawson had served as janitor for a number of years." End quote.
I'm sure there would have been a huge turnout for a murder like that. But the next article has an update 2 weeks later, I think, right?
Yeah, that's right. So the next article is from the Belleville News Democrat, dated October 18th, 1911. Clues, C-L-E-W-S, to murder found. Quote, Slayer of Dawson family believed to be the same person who is responsible for Colorado crime. Monmouth, Illinois, October 18. Local officials believe they have discovered the instrument with which the Dawson triple murder was committed in this city October 1st. A gas pipe 18 inches long with an elbow jointed on one end and covered with hair and blood was found at the rear of the Dawson house when a fence was removed. With the pipe was found a pocket flashlight marked, quote, Colorado Springs, September 4th, 11, end quote. This strengthens the belief which the local authorities have had that the Colorado Springs tragedy and the local crime are connected, end quote.
So even at that time, they suspected that it might be one person at fault for both of these bloody nights.
Yeah, they did. They did. And so that flashlight that was engraved with the September 4, 1911 Colorado Springs, turns out there was a picnic held by none other than the Modern Woodsman in Colorado Springs on that day. It was only about a week later that the first double murders happened. So it definitely does make you wonder if these murders were linked.
So let's talk about some of the aspects of this case that match the previous two and what's different. In Colorado Springs, the murders happened very close to the train tracks, whereas this time it was several blocks away.
But still close.
Yeah, it's still close, yeah. Both attackers used a weapon of opportunity to bludgeon the sleeping victims to death. Axes would have been a household tool, as we know from so many of our cases already, but in this case it seems there was a length of a pipe. In all three homes, curtains had been drawn. Again, the murders likely happened in the early hours of Sunday morning. There were apparently some reports that Georgia was found in her bed, off the pillow and with one hand raised above her head.
Yeah, remember that about Georgia for the next episode.
The Dawsons did not have a dog. Robbery was not the motive. There was cash in the house.
Yeah, so the bloody fingerprints on the pipe that was used as the murder weapon were apparently photographed, but we don't have much in the way of photographs. Again, we only have a picture of the crowd around the home the day after the bodies were discovered and a photo of their tombstone. There were a few suspects for this case right off the bat. There were rumors of jailhouse snitch sort of situations from when William was in prison. There were lots of rumors and theory, but there was nothing concrete. And if you're thinking that they probably arrested a black man for the crime because they were a white family living in a predominantly black neighborhood, you're right, they did eventually, but he was also eventually exonerated. We may get more into that if we have time next week when we get into suspects, but this is still considered a very much an unsolved crime.
We will pause here for a moment for a word from our sponsor for this week's episode, Podcorn. Especially when you're new to podcasting, finding the right sponsor for your show can be quite overwhelming. Podcorn is there to help podcasters to connect with sponsors.
Yeah, you can easily find companies your audience would be interested in. You can set your own rates and choose how you would like to incorporate the sponsor into your podcast, from a simple ad to a more elaborate discussions, interview segments, or giveaways.
Podcorn gave us the opportunity to work with interesting brands, and it makes the process really easy. You choose a company you would like to work with, you send in your proposal, and chat with your sponsor directly in your own online workroom.
And the most important part for us podcasters is you don't give up any rights to your creative work. Podcorn is there to support you and your podcast.
If you're interested in connecting with brands via Podcorn, just click the link in this episode's description and it will take you to www.podcorn.com, where you can set up an account for free to start browsing all available sponsorships.
Go do it. It's good stuff. Okay, so the next family murder would take place before the month was through. In Ellsworth, Kansas, a young family, the Showmans, would be the next victim.
Ellsworth in 1911 was a town of about 2,500 people, mostly agricultural community with a police force consisting of one policeman and a night watchman. And in addition to the police force, the sheriff of Ellsworth County was R.W. Bradshaw. We can imagine not a lot of crime in the area.
No.
William Showman was a chauffeur and mechanic. His dad was a Civil War vet, and he had several siblings. He married Pauline Kratky, who was a first-generation American. Her parents had emigrated from Bohemia, today known as Czech Republic. So Will and Pauline were a lovely couple. They got married around 1904, and in 1911 he was 31, she was 27, and they had 3 kids. There was Lester, age 7, Fern, who was 4, and baby Fenton, who just turned 2. On Sunday, October 15th, 1911, so 2 weeks after the Dawsons were murdered, but before they had found the murder weapon, the Showman family had spent a pleasant afternoon visiting a neighbor by the name of Mrs. Snook. which is a name I love.
Yeah, it's great. I don't know if it's Snook or Snook, but I love it both ways. Snook.
Laurie Snook's husband worked nights, so they had gotten into the habit of visiting with her most evenings. They left the Snook home around 9 that night, and the little family of 5 walked the 2 blocks back to their home. The next day, around 5 in the afternoon, Mrs. Snook was expecting them for another visit. When they didn't show up, she called their house, and there was no answer. So she called Will's employer, and they said he hadn't shown up for work. So she's now concerned, and she decides to walk the 2 blocks over to the showman's and see what's wrong.
This happens so often in our stories, and it's the worst, isn't it? I don't ever want to find a body like this. Okay, so poor Mrs. Snook, she knocks on the door of this little house, but there's no answer, but the door is unlocked. So here's a quote from her from the Ellsworth Reporter. Quote, when interviewed Monday evening, Mrs. Snook said, Sunday evening, Mr. and Mrs. Showman and their children were visiting with us and left for their home about 2 blocks away at 9 o'clock. We have been in the habit of visiting back and forth with each other, and Monday I called them up over the telephone several times, but I could get no answer. I then called up Mr. Showman's place of work, and his employer informed me that Mr. Showman had not reported for work that day. Thinking that some of the family might be ill, I took my child and walked over to their house and entered through the back door and passed through the kitchen into the front room. I gave just one look at the battered and bloody bodies lying on the beds and ran from the house and called up Mr. Showman's brother John, who came to the house, then notified the sheriff. I know of no reason why this terrible crime should have been committed. So far as I know, the Showmans were without enemies. They were good-natured, likable people, and I cannot understand why anyone should harbor such ill will against them. The Showmans owned a bird dog, and several times on Monday the dog came to our house, and I drove him away, telling him to go back home, which he did, only to return again. When I walked into their house, the dog was inside lying down. I do not know how he got inside, unless he opened the screen door, which he might have done. The outside doors were unlocked and open, the murderer apparently having left them that way. The dog was accounted a good watchdog, and how the assassin perpetrated his foul deed without arousing the dog and giving an alarm, I cannot understand. End quote.
This part with the dog is very strange and sad.
Yeah.
I can only imagine that maybe the dog was out when the killer arrived and just missed the whole thing. But then I'm also glad that he wasn't hurt.
Yes. Oh, yeah, me too. The bit with the dog, it's very odd. It makes me sad because it seems like the dog kept going to Mrs. Snook for help, like Lassie style, and she just kept shooing it home. But it also makes me wonder if the killer was invited in. Do you know what I mean? Was it?
Yeah.
But then they were in their beds. They were found in their beds. So this is it. The things with some of the aspects of these murders are just so strange and creepy. And I mean, they're always sad, but the dog thing really makes me sad. And it's that thing, I'm sure all of our listeners know this, but there has been a little bit of a PSA going around lately. If you're ever anywhere and a dog wearing a service dog vest comes up to you, follow it. Yeah? This has been a thing lately where I think this actually happened somewhere. A woman was having a seizure and the dog went to somebody who called animal control reporting a lost dog. And it was like, no, you follow the service dog because it's coming to you for help.
I think we almost have no service dogs except for the blind.
They're getting more and more popular here. I have a friend who uses one for EDS. The dog can, my friend Taplin, her dog knows when her blood pressure, she has POTS. So if her blood pressure is about to bottom out, I guess the dog senses it and he'll get on her lap and apply compression to keep the blood more up in the top half of her body. It's fascinating what some of these dogs do. Yeah, I know they're used for diabetes.
Epilepsy, yeah.
Yeah, I told my husband when the time comes like that I need a walker, I want to get a Great Dane trained instead. Just go everywhere with my dog.
So bloodhounds were brought in, but the scent went to the railroad tracks and was lost when the murder got on a Frisco or Union Pacific train. And as for the crime scene, well, it was bad. So the house itself was tiny. One room with a lean-to off the back. The front room had 2 beds in it and the family was found bludgeoned. Let's say bludgeoned with extreme prejudice beyond recognition. Which was the case with all of these killings. There is some reporting that Pauline may have been sexually assaulted. There's reports of bruising on her body and of her being posed. One paper reports the killer had an, quote, abnormal hatred, end quote, toward her. and I think you feel all like me whenever they keep things so vague. It makes it so much worse for me because now my head automatically goes through all those horrendous things that this could possibly mean.
Yeah, no, I'm the same. I get they're trying to not be too graphic, but like suggestions of terrible things, it means my brain is going to go to the worst possible thing. You know, it's like I'm immediately like, oh no, human centipede, which I know is probably like nowhere near as bad as my mind thinks it is, but it's just what happens when I don't know. It's just... Yeah.
Have you even seen Human Centipede?
I have not, but I know the basic mechanics of the thing, and my imagination works pretty well. So have you? I feel like you would have seen it. You're a cinephile. I feel like you'd be more likely than me to just watch anything with a weird reputation.
Well, first of all, I hate the word cinephile. I'm not a cinephile.
Oh, you are?
Also, Human Centipede is not something that cinephiles watch. But yes, I did. I watched Human Centipede. First and the second part. I ate porridge while watching it. I don't care. I've seen Salo in my late teens or like early 20s. There's just rarely something in movies that can really shock me anymore after watching Pasolini.
Oh, well, I'm still pretty shockable. It just goes back to my general flappability. I think I'm more, and it's always something silly. I'll always be shocked by something and then after the fact be like, why does this shock me? I know better. Like this happens all the time. All right, let's talk about some of the other clues and similarities.
So, of course, it was another poor family. It was another Sunday crime. Some papers started calling him the Sabbath killer. There was a lantern, but the chimney had been removed and the wick bent to make the flame very low. This was found at the foot of the bed, which gives more of a, I want to call it creep factor to whatever might have been done, hopefully posthumously to Pauline.
Mm-hmm.
The chimney was found unbroken, so clearly the killer removed it to make the flame light dimmer. The murder weapon, an axe, was found behind the open door separating the two rooms. It showed evidence of having been washed off by the killer, but there was still blood and hair on it. There was a bucket used by the killer to wash his hands, and apparently half-heartedly the axe, as mentioned before. A cloak was thrown over the telephone. There are a few theories as to why this happened. Either the killer might have just wanted to silence Mrs. Snook's phone calls, maybe?
Maybe, because she kept calling. But there's also a theory that the killer might have seen the phone and thought that it looked like a face. You remember those old crank telephones? So imagine it's a rectangular box, yeah, and it's got those two bells that look kind of like eyes, So maybe he thought it looked like a face, and he covered the faces of his victims. So maybe he has an issue with faces. Maybe he has, it's scopophobia, right? Which is a fear of being looked at. Maybe that was part of his psychosis.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think that's really possible. He seems to obliterate the faces of all of his victims and then often also covered their heads after the fact.
Two initial suspects were a man with the last name Smith or Smithson. He was finally ruled out, as was, there was a situation with an abusive ex-brother-in-law of Pauline, Charles Marzick. So Pauline's sister had been married to him, and by all accounts, the impression we get is that he was a bad guy. I think he was abusive and it wasn't a good situation. So while Charles was in prison for stealing grain, Pauline helped her sister get a divorce from him while he was in prison. So he was also arrested and held with the murders, but he was also eventually ruled out. The mayor, M.L. Meek, he shut down the town for the funeral. Well, for an hour anyway. And they also offered a $1,000 reward to anyone having information that would lead to an arrest. And here's just a little bit from their obituary. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but in the other murders, it left a lot of grief behind. So this is from the Ellsworth Reporter, October 26, 1911. Quote, William Showman is survived by his mother, Mrs. David Showman, and three brothers, John, George, and Ringo. No, kidding. Sorry. The last one was Samuel. Sorry, I couldn't. Automatic. Mrs. Showman is survived by her parents, Mr. and Mrs. John Kratke, residing at Black Wolf, four sisters, Mrs. Minnie Vopat of Black Wolf, Mrs. Mary Suchek of Lamount, Oklahoma, Mrs. Frank Yilka of Tescott, Kansas, and Ms. Claire Kratke of Holyrood, and 2 brothers, John and Emil, residing at Holyrood. Interment was made in the Ellsworth Cemetery, and the remains were followed to their last resting place by a large concourse of people, there being over 150 carriages in line. The bodies were carried to the cemetery in 3 hearses and an ambulance. The heartfelt sympathy of the entire community goes out to the sorrowing relatives of the deceased who were so cruelly cut off from this earthly life. End quote.
It's very sad.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine just a whole family. It's so awful. And we have one more murder to talk about before we end this little collection of murders that came before Villisca. So we're now going to jump ahead about 8 months, which really does, I think we both makes us wonder what happened. You know, did something happen in that time period? I think the best guess, right, would be that the killer was probably locked up for a more minor crime. But the other issue, of course, was that other news might have overshadowed other murders because the Titanic sank in April of 1912, and that would have just absolutely dominated the news, right? So there are a lot of reasons we don't see the similar, like every 2 week roughly pattern until suddenly we do.
Yeah, and we are now in June of 1912, and we are in Paola, Kansas. And it's the Hudson murders. So Roland Hudson and his wife, and I'm not joking now, he married a woman named Anna Axie.
Yeah.
Axie.
A-X-X-E. I feel like the second X is silent.
Anna X.
Axe or Axie? I don't know.
And she went by Annie, I think.
Yeah, she did.
They were married in April of 1910 in Ohio, and at that time Roland was working in a machine shop and it was damaging his lungs, so he took a more healthy job with the railroad and with coal.
Yeah, you don't generally think, wow, this machinery job grinding metal is really fucking up my lungs. I think I'm gonna see if I can get one of those good jobs working with coal. Like it just...
Yeah, out in the fresh air.
Yeah.
It shows how little people knew back then about
it's
health.
True. It probably was better though, yeah.
Yeah. So you would think that makes sense, but yeah.
That's what happened.
That happens and... That job brought them to Kansas. They rented a small cottage about 2 blocks east of the Frisco train depot. They didn't have much, but had bought some secondhand furniture, and they had made a nice home for themselves. They were nesting.
They were nesting. And you're all going to be very relieved to know that the papers report that Anna kept a tidy house. I am never going to report on cases where the opposite was reported because fuck that. Like no one, not even my husband, wishes more than I do that I was super neat and tidy. I am not. I'm clean. Like everything is sanitized, but like under the dust and just piles of stuff, I'm not neat. My home always looks like it's been like, what is this? Like there appears to have been a struggle is my decorating style. Like it always looks like we're 3 days into battling a poltergeist or trying to exorcise some demons. It's whatever that neat and tidy gene is, I do not have it. And everyone who knows me well knows this. So it doesn't need to go in the newspapers about my eventual horrific murder, right? I mean, strangers don't need to know these things. Sorry, rant over.
I used to be so neat and tidy. I was the kind of person who cleaned all the time, even while the guests were over.
You just had to get up and clean?
Super nice. Yeah. I used to cry when I was too dusty and like really crap like that. And then I realized, screw that. Life is too short to cry over dust. I'm now often neat. Not always, and I think that's okay. Plus my husband, he's so neat and tidy. He cleans way better than I do, which is so nice.
It is.
Well, whatever. They had a tidy house, but there were also lots of rumors printed about Anna having maybe been unfaithful when her husband was away for work.
Which again, I don't know how much we can trust the newspapers because it seems sometimes like they were trying to find motive for someone killing the couple. I don't know. I don't think it's super helpful to say she was unfaithful in the newspapers.
Also, when Roland's father arrived, he spoke well of her.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think unfaithful spouse, that's something I would tell my parents.
I don't know if I would. I feel like if it was my parents, they would not forgive it. They'd never forget it. I don't know. I think it would be, they'd never forgive and forget. So I think unless my husband was like physically hurting me or if I was leaving him, I probably wouldn't tell my parents just because I'd be afraid they would never forgive him. You know, like the relationship would never be okay again. But it is also said that he left her 3 times in the first year of marriage. So I think that's why, because she was being unfaithful, but I don't know. This sounds like one of those overly dramatic couples, that thrive, like not a healthy relationship. They were still really young, early 20s, so I don't know.
Some relationships are just very dramatic.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so it's Thursday, June 6th, 1912. Roland was supposed to be at work that morning, but he doesn't show. And the foreman heads to the house that afternoon because he's concerned, because it's unlike Roland to not show for his job. When he gets to their house, there are a few women milling about outside. They've come for the same reason. They haven't seen Anna as usual and they are concerned. Inside, it's a terrible scene. Roland and Anna are in bed with the covers over their heads, blood pooling on the floor beneath the bed. It's just awful.
Yeah, and they can tell by the holes in the blankets that the blankets were pulled up over their heads and then blows were stabbed through the blankets.
Yeah, and as in the other cases, it seems Anna got the worst of it. The papers all report her face was particularly mangled, while her husband seemed to have had his skull crushed while sleeping. It looks like Anna might have put up some struggle sitting upright in bed when her husband was killed. There were reported wounds on the back of her head too. As in a few of the other murders, there was a lamp with the chimney removed and the wick low at the foot of the bed. There was no evidence of washing up at this crime scene, even though one of the rooms had a laundry setup with a waiting bucket of water in it. The curtains were all pulled tight, and it seems the killer came in through a window and then left through the door, leaving it unlocked, and they had no dog.
Yeah. Eventually a coal pick, so basically like a pickaxe with a sharp axey bit on one side and also sharp stabby bit on the other. I'm so precise when I describe these tools. The one with the stabby bit and the axey parts. That was eventually found, and that was determined to be the murder weapon. There are similarities, but also differences. One more similarity is that on the same night the Hudsons were murdered, another family just next door was actually awakened to the sound of breaking glass in the middle of the night. This is a direct quote from the Getting the Axe blog. Quote, "Around midnight, another neighbor, Mrs. Joseph Longmire, and her daughter Sadie were awoken by the sound of shattering glass in the dining room. Mrs. Longmire was up in time to see a man fleeing through the back of the house. The source of the glass was a smashed chimney lamp. The intruder had left behind a kimono that was believed to have belonged to Anna Hudson. A screen from a back window had been removed in order to gain access to the house. If Mrs. Longmire and Mrs. Pryor were accurate, then the Hudsons were killed between 10 and midnight on June 5th, 1912. End quote.
That's very creepy.
Yeah. You just wonder, did the killer mean for this to be a double event like the Wayne and Burnham families, right? Because there were reports of footsteps heard on porches or screens being tampered with in homes that were kind of near the other murders, but there was nothing as concrete as this. Like all the other ones they were so vague that we didn't really feel like we could report them accurately, but this event...
I think that about wraps up the murders that happened before Villisca.
Yeah.
Because the axe murders actually happened less than a week after the Hudson murders in Paola. We'll get into the Villisca axe murders and look at the more interesting suspects for this still unsolved case next week.
Yeah, and it's such an interesting theory that this was all the work of one person. We know several of the small town police forces. They hired Pinkerton detectives, and there are people today who are researching these old records. They're trying to find what they can to prove or disprove this theory of a serial killer. Please do take a look at our sources for further reading and more information. Honestly, this could be a 10-part serial. There's just so much information, but I really hope we've given you a good amount of information to start with. It's fascinating and sad and scary.
That's what we're all here for. We'll post photos in our Facebook and Instagram. Annie, you've got something good this week?
Yeah, I do. So... I'm not looking forward to it, but it's good. Today I have an appointment later on today for my annual mammogram. I was just really struggling with a really miserable flare of both the fibromyalgia and costochondritis, which is a condition where it's like your rib cage gets inflamed. So I'm a year overdue for my annual mammogram. It was too painful to have anything touch my ribs, really. And that's one of the things about chronic illness that people don't talk very much about. It's just the fact that these really very essential, important things like mammograms and dental cleanings and pap smears, dermatology and haircuts and just essential things get put on a back burner because you're struggling so much to just exist. Sometimes it's so hard to just get through. But I've finally rescheduled. I'm finally feeling better. I've got my fingers and toes crossed. It doesn't trigger another flare, but if it does, it needs doing. So yeah, it's just, it feels really good to get something off my very, 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 very long to-do list. The dentist is next. This is good. And if I'm telling everyone I'm doing these things, so now I have to do them.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
I know how it feels to put off things for a long time.
Yeah.
I mean, I just had my dental cleaning a couple of days ago. I only started talking about this a couple of years ago. I had some childhood trauma. Trauma sounds so dramatic though, but it's kind of a trauma which caused severe fear of dentists for me. I know nobody likes to go to the dentist, but I was never much worried about the pain. I know I can handle the pain, but I had dentists yell at me as a kid, and since then I was always scared they would yell at me or laugh at me for having horrible teeth.
Oh, yeah.
I know it's very irrational.
No, it's rational. It's even without that, every time I go to the dentist, I'm like, they're going to yell at me. I brush and I floss and I do all the things, but it's like, oh.
So I really, I did put off going to the dentist for a very long time. And the more I would put it off, the more it would scare me. I used to even have nightmares where all my teeth were falling out. It's the worst.
Yeah.
And after I met my husband at one time, I opened up to him about my fear, and that helped me a bit. And I forced myself to go to the dentist and have everything done that I needed to do. And then I started to go regularly, and I went again last week to have my teeth cleaned, and the dentist said I will just need a minor surgery on my gum and I need one crown, and otherwise my teeth are good now. They're good.
Good.
So this was me opening up to all of you out there, which is a very weird thing for me to do because it's not what Austrians do usually.
No.
Yeah, I know there must be more people like me out there, and I just want to tell you, I know it's so hard, and I know you think it can't be fixed, but it can. Trust me. There are lovely dentists out there who know exactly how to handle patients like us.
Yeah.
These were very weird but necessary something goods, Annie, this week.
They are. They're important. They're important. Self-care. You have to take care of yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, please join our Facebook group. Remember to vote on our poll for our 1-year anniversary episode.
Yeah.
Please, if you can, leave us a review on iTunes. It helps us so much, really.
It does. It really does. Absolutely. And yeah, like Johanna just said, come join the Facebook group. It's such a great space. It's murder memes and discussions about the cases that we cover, but also everybody's pets, weird house porn, weird historical stuff. It's such a great, relaxing place to be on Facebook. And yeah, vote for what you want us to cover, because that poll is going to have to close probably this weekend, right? This next coming weekend.
Yeah.
So that we can start researching.
Another thing, we want to say hi to Pee-wee in Australia. Thank you for oh my god, it was such a lovely review. We're so sorry to hear about the loss of your dog. Just know we're thinking of you.
Yeah, Pee-wee, you know what I'm going to say now. Listen, you've got this. Things are going to get better. You're not alone. And as Winston Churchill once said, if you're going through hell,
keep going. Tschüss.
Bye.